Welcome to Mediascape, Insights from Digital Changemakers, a speaker series and podcast brought to you by USC Annenberg's Digital Media Management program. Join us as we unlock the secrets to success in an increasingly digital world. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Mediascape, where we meet with digital change makers. And this is brought to you by the Digital Media Management Master's Degree program. For anybody who is joining us who isn't part of this wonderful program, it's great to have you with us. And tonight is all about podcasting. We'll talk about Anika and who she is and where she comes from in her background in just a second. But Anika, if you could, in this world full of media and saturation and noise and really high quality, explosive Hollywood effects-laden shows, are podcasts, are they really making a dent? Are they really finding an audience?
I love that you asked that, Joseph. Thank you. And especially, with all the strikes going on in Hollywood right now, there's no time better than podcasts. In fact, there are more weekly podcast listeners in the US than Netflix subscribers. So just to give you a little size of the market tidbit. So there is definitely a place for podcasts here and now. And if you look at Apple Podcasts, only about 18.4% of podcasts on Apple are currently active, which means they've released an episode in the last 90 days. So that means as of May 2023, there are less than 500,000 active podcasts on Apple. Now, in the full landscape, which we'll see later, there are over 5 million podcasts that exist in the world that have been published at some time that people are still paying to host on some hosting site, even if they're not producing any episodes. So 62% or over 207 million Americans have listened to podcasts at least once. And podcasting ad revenue grew 26% year over year in 2022 to reach $1.8 billion. So that actually outpaces the total digital ad market, which was up 11%. And the current industry market size is $23.56 billion. So yes, this is definitely at the time to get into podcasting if you're thinking about it, whether it's from a host perspective, a guest perspective, or production perspective, or anywhere in between.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Anika, as we were discussing just a second ago, we do have a bunch of students in DMM who are building podcasts and vodcasts, which I know we'll discuss a little bit tonight as well, as part of their capstone project. So this is something that is it's timely for many of our students, and it's on a lot of our hearts. And thinking about not only how to find an audience, but it's as simple as some of the nuts and bolts of how do you make the content interesting? What kind of microphone do you choose? Is there a really high barrier to entry that people should be intimidated by or not? And so we're really excited to learn from you. Anika, let's get to know you just a little bit. If you could please tell us, Anika, tell us about your brand Amplified. How long have you been running that organization?
Well, Your Brand Amplified is my podcast it's been running since November of 2020, so almost 3 years now. And it's powered by Full Capacity Marketing. I don't know if everybody can see in the chat my bio that Joseph put in, or if you came in a little bit later, you might not be able to see it. And I'm the VP of Full Capacity Marketing, where we focus on brand strategy, PR, and digital marketing and media for clients, primarily workforce development, education, nonprofit, and entrepreneurship.
Amazing. And what got you excited to start this podcast? Obviously, in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah, well, I had a little bit of a road. So I actually used to live in Houston. I live back in LA now, but when I lived in Houston, I had a radio and Facebook Live show. And it was called Real Beauty, Real Women. We would interview people in the community doing good stuff, right? So people from nonprofits or people who just had great ideas or were inspiring. And it was really fun. And then I moved back to LA and we tried doing it virtually, but it wasn't quite as good as being in person, because in person we could do different sets and move around, have commercial breaks and do all that stuff, even though it was, for Facebook and for radio. Then when I started my agency that I then merged later, I had a couple of clients who asked me to produce their podcasts. Well, and I guess before that, in between the radio show and getting into podcasting, I also virtually EP'd and was like executive producer and showrunner for a jewelry company called Clearly Kristen. And she had a show called End Style with Clearly Kristen that was on a streaming platform. And so I was doing everything virtually over Frame.io and, watching all Riverside FM and StreamYard and watching everything and getting all the guests and writing all the scripts. And so it gave me a little bit of a taste for production. And at that point, I had a couple of clients who wanted to start podcasts, didn't have the time, knew that I had both been a host and had production experience, and so asked me to step in and start their podcasts for them. After that journey, it's one of those things in podcasts, that whole landscape of there are not that many active podcasts because a lot of people give up. They don't have the funding. They don't have the fortitude. They can't continue their journey. So my partner, who is in the film industry and who's an editor, said, why don't you just start your own podcast? And I was like, yeah, I'm getting all the guests and doing all the work. They don't really have funding, so I may as well just do my own. And so that's when I started Your Brand Amplified.
Amazing. And how's it gone? I think you told me that you have a couple of subscribers at this point.
I do. I'm a little under 40,000 listeners a month. And I have some stats that I'll pull up when we get into like the meat of the presentation that shows, but it's a long game. And that's a lot of the advice I'm going to give. So we're going to talk a lot about when podcasting started, what the opportunities are. And then if you're starting a podcast, all of the different things to consider. And certainly we can't fit everything into this time, but we're going to fit as much as possible. And then I'm always available for questions.
Amazing. All right. Well, tell us just a little bit more before we dive into it about some of your background and your board work. You're incredibly generous with your time. I know that you care a lot about the organizations and the causes that you support. If you want to mention a couple things related to that, and also your philosophy of why you give so much.
Well, to back up a little bit, my start in marketing and PR started out in Lawrence, Kansas. I loved music. I loved listening to music. And I was in high school. I was going to Kansas City to go listen to DJs all the time because there really wasn't a lot to do there, but go dancing, right? I had a fake ID that said I was 18 just so I could go dancing. I didn't care about drinking or anything else. I just wanted to go to the club and listen to good music. So I started getting asked when I was, I think, a junior in high school to start promoting local DJs and their events. So that way, get in for free. I'm like, of course I'm going to do that. So my career just went organically from there. Took me from promoting club nights, throwing raves and events, and starting to put together fashion shows and give back nights at these venues, to moving to Chicago, working for a marketing firm called Kevin Bergen Associates, while at the same time being a club kid. Getting tired of that lifestyle and moving to LA for the first of 3 times, where I started working for a magazine called Raygun. Raygun Media was a big art and music magazine at the time. Then I did that. I did a little bit of Hollywood stuff, worked for KBA. Then I moved up to San Francisco, where I launched Revolution Magazine, which was a dance music magazine, and then Official Xbox Magazine when Xbox first came out. So that was kind of the start of my journey. So in just that phase, I got to touch a lot of different things. I got to touch PR, digital, when the internet was first starting. And I had to go into music chat rooms and find people to help promote magazines. I would do experiential things like snowboard events or events with Fox Home Video when home video was a thing. And we'd have Stan Lee come and judge competitions of our readers for the magazine. So I got to do a lot of really cool things. And that kind of took me to where I am today. The connection with the work I do now is that I never knew if I wanted to be a social worker or a business person. So the fact that I get to work with a variety of organizations that are giving back, whether it's workforce, education, nonprofit, or entrepreneurs, is really what drives me. And then for my philanthropic work, I am involved in a nonprofit called Learn, Grow, Lead. We focus on education in Ghana. So we have an orphanage, we pay for kids to go to school, and then we have organic farming so that there's a continuous revenue stream so that it's not always dependent on outsiders. And then I'm also on the board of Influencers Foundation. And then with my daughter, we volunteer locally with National Charity League down in the South Bay. And then,
That's an incredible list. For anybody who's gone through 500 with me, one of the first things I say is that I really believe the key to networking is that you approach with what you can give, not what you can take or extract. And Anika, really, when you're living that philosophy in all the things that you're doing, I mean, do you ever say no when people ask you, hey, Anika, why don't you come and dedicate your time?
I've definitely been getting better at saying no. So, There's only so much you can do when you have a job that you love, that when you're also teaching, podcasting, and you have a teenager. So,
Right.
Something has to give.
And as we were saying, for many folks who are in the program, one of the reasons why I love DMM so much is that because it's online, it makes it tremendously convenient for all of us who are parents and maybe spread around the country or even just across the city to be able to engage, learn, grow. And you're living that as well.
Yeah. I was actually grading the finals from France a few weeks ago for my last class that I taught for the program. And so
jealous. We have our first question that just came in from Alan. And Alan said, is AI a threat from your perspective, or is it valuable?
Oh, it's so valuable. And Joseph, let me know when you want me to jump into the slides. But what AI is a game changer for podcasts. There are a number of platforms that are being built around just providing AI tools so that you can create better show notes, better blog posts. The AI tools give you captions for social media. They give you really great titles that are SEO qualified titles as well. So AI is definitely a positive game changer when it comes to the podcast world. I know it's not for everything else necessarily, but it is for that.
Yeah, it's a great starting off point. It's the cure for the blank page or any kind of writer's block. That's how I see it. All right, fantastic. Well, Lizzie, I'm going to hold your question for a second because Anika is going to get started with her presentation, and I'll sprinkle these in as we go.
Great. Well, I will say the other thing about AI, it's all based on the transcript of your actual podcast. So it's not creating something brand new. It's taking the words directly from your interview. So that's a little bit different than I think a lot of people, the way that we traditionally think about AI. But that's definitely a big positive. So we will get into it. So again, the opportunity, there's a huge opportunity. There are not that many active podcasts. So you have the chance to really get in and be seen pretty quickly. So my journey to podcasting, I talked a little bit about co-hosting the Real Beauty Real Women Radio and Facebook Live show, being showrunner and EP for Unstyle with Slowly Kristen. And then you can still find Women Acquiring Assets and Giving Credit on all of the different podcast platforms. We're not recording new episodes anymore, so that's a different case. But again, those are two of the many that have kind of died on the hill of podcasting, right? And so that takes us to today, where I host and produce Your Brand Amplified. I also pitch podcasts for my PR clients. I pulled these stats for my podcast from Chartable a couple of days ago. They send me an update every couple of days. I also have some other ones that show I'm like number 200 something in Japan. It's really interesting because you never know exactly where you're going to hit when it comes to where your podcast is going to be on the charts. But this just kind of gives you an overview of the 5 million podcasts that exist. Or, if you want to go down and distill it to the ones that are active, these are my current rankings when it comes to global, US, for all podcasts, business podcasts. And then I'm apparently ranking in France and Canada as well. This is not something that happens overnight unless you are a big celebrity or have a big bank, big sponsor behind you who's going to spend a lot of money promoting your podcast. This is definitely, it takes time to get here. And that's something I'll definitely be talking about. So why are podcasts so hot right now? Why do you want to start? How do you get started? How do you find and grow your audience? And how do you monetize? We saw there's a lot of money available, but for an individual podcaster, it's a lot harder to get part of that money. So there are a lot of ways that I see people using podcasts that I'll talk about. So the first podcast was actually released 20 years ago yesterday. It was produced by Christopher Lydon and Dave Weiner as an audio MP3 from a series of interviews with bloggers. So it took one medium, right? Blogging, which was really big then, and created what they called weblogs for your ears. Christopher Lydon was a New York Times political journalist, a news anchor, and a radio host. And he still hosts a Boston-based radio show called Open Source today. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Most people don't realize, they think it was maybe 2004, maybe a couple years later, but we're celebrating 20 years. And 20 years later, there are 464.7 million podcast listeners globally, predicted to reach 504.9 million next year. There are 5 million podcasts overall with 70 million episodes between them. Podcasts are available in 150 languages, and Spotify and Apple are the two biggest podcast streaming services on the globe. The interesting thing is Spotify has about double the number of podcasts available on it, but Apple is the biggest streaming platform globally. Like if you look at Europe, if you look at different countries.
So this is the other question about how gradual was your audience growth as you're talking about? Were there any single moments, was there a big celebrity that came or a really explosive episode that happened that made it rise quickly, or was it just very gradual?
Yeah, it was gradual. What I believe and what I was told and then I saw is that when you reach about 100 episodes, you have momentum and the podcast starts being seen by a lot more people. Some of the important things are going to be who your guests are. Honestly, if you have a big celebrity, they're probably not going to promote it. But if you have the right people promoting who have maybe big LinkedIn followings, they are maybe not a celebrity that we would know of, but they're somebody who had a huge company, or they took their company to billions of dollars and they still have a pretty big audience and they might have a big newsletter. It's part of the whole continuum. You want to find guests who are going to promote your podcast episodes. That is so much more important than having that big shot who's not just another notch on their belt and they're not going to work on that. The other thing is when you start investing in the podcast, right? So you want to promote it via your own channels. You want to make sure that you're on all the platforms, that it's on your website, that you're doing blog posts, that you're doing all the different things. But then it's also good to start putting some ad dollars and doing some boosts and finding people who want to come on your podcast who will do the same.
Great. Thank you. And one more from Sydney, and then we can jump into your presentation. So Sydney said, I've noticed that some of the podcasts started sprinkling in more video content, video episodes, which I know we'll get into later. How and why does this differ from vlogging, let's just say, on other platforms like YouTube? What's the difference?
So YouTube actually has a podcast channel, if you will, now. So if you, on your brand, Amplified, there's like video, but then there's also podcasts. So that's where we populate. And we're getting a little bit ahead, but that's totally okay because it'll just be emphasized again. But Spotify, Apple, and YouTube all allow you to upload vodcasts, which is the common vernacular for a video podcast. It's very small market share. What's interesting is a lot of people, almost everybody records the video, but most of them don't use it. Why? Because it's a lot harder to edit video than it is to edit audio, right? You're going to be editing out the those awkward moments, those silences, the same way you would edit them out of your audio. And there aren't necessarily people who have the time or the skill, especially if you're doing all of the production yourself.
All right. Thanks, Anika. Well, let's jump back into your presentation.
So looking at the audience, Gen Z is flocking to podcasts. It's really increasing among 12 to 54-year-olds. Right. So if you look at Gen Z specifically, 47% of Americans 13 to 24 have listened to a podcast in the last month. And there's been a 57% increase in listenership in that age group in the last 5 years. Men are more likely to have listened to a podcast in the past week, which I think is interesting. I listen to podcasts all the time when I'm in the car, when I'm walking my dogs, when I wake up in the morning, when I'm making dinner. I'm an avid listener of other people's podcasts, not just a creator of a podcast. And most women I know are very into podcasts. But if you look at things like, I guess, Joe Rogan or Smartless, podcasts like that, which are Joe Rogan still is the biggest platform, I can see why that statistic might skew more towards men. And then 33% have listened to a podcast while commuting. So you have an active listenership. So one of the things that I did when I started my podcast was I looked at average commute times, and it was about 27 minutes. And I tried to stay within that time frame for the first few episodes, and then I threw it out the window because I realized if somebody wants to listen to your content, they're going to. It doesn't matter how long it is. It's really about the connection that you're forming with the audience, like anything that you do in branding. So podcast versus vodcast. Yeah, and Spotify, Apple, and YouTube have all incorporated podcasting into their platforms, but only 17% of hosts record and then use their video right now. So there's not only huge opportunity in starting a podcast right now, but also in doing a vodcast. If you look at market opportunities with YouTube alone, YouTube has over 2 billion users, and 43% of monthly podcast users have watched an episode of a podcast or vodcast on YouTube. If you have the video, it's also a lot easier to create promotional material. Now we know everything is moving toward, well, unless you count the 2 social media platforms I joined this weekend, which were Spill and what's the other one? The Instagram one. Why can't I think of it right now? But yeah, the ones that don't have video at the forefront, everything else is video at the forefront, right? So a lot of times my team will create TikTok, like little snippets of my guests and like a little nugget from their interview. And then we'll repopulate that onto Reels and create so much video content. I've heard it said that out of every video or audio podcast episode, especially if you do the vodcast way, you can get about 100 pieces of content, right? Between just static images, quotes, and then all the different videos. So I think one of the great things about video is it's not only easier social promo, but it also really, you can have your Zoom background or your, whatever platform of choice background that highlights your business. It also helps people relate to you because they get to see you. They feel like they know you and that they get to interact with you. So when you're looking at starting a podcast, what are your goals? This is the biggest question. Now, some of the drop off in the podcast numbers is because those podcasters have done a limited series, right? You see that a lot with like true crime or with cults. I know cults are a big thing right now. So people will do one that will go in hand with maybe a documentary or an article that they've written. And where they do a series of interviews, maybe they do 4, 5, 6 episodes, kind of like a docuseries that you'd watch on Netflix. So you really have to think about, are you looking for short form or do you want something that's very long lasting, that you're really building a relationship with people who become your friends? They think of you as their confidant. They're going to become your clients and your customers. And then what format do you want to follow? Do you want to do an interview style, which is usually pretty easy for people, right? I like doing an interview style because it's not about me. It's about what the other person is sharing with my audience. What I find is often it reinforces things that I already knew or that I needed to hear that day when they're talking about it, whatever it is, whether it's SEO or a new PR strategy or something financing for business or feng shui for your office, whatever it is, I'm getting those tidbits. So you have interview, you could have a panel, which is what we did when I did my radio show that was also on Facebook. You can have a solo interview. Those tend to be shorter content, right? I've heard solo podcasters who come on and do 2 questions and 1 deep thought for the day. So every morning you're supposed to go on, you have 2 questions you're supposed to answer to get to know yourself better and to have introspection for the day, and 1 quote. So there's all kinds of formats. There's no one way that's better to do it than another. You can do repurposed content. So you can take speeches you've given, classes that you've taught, and turn it into podcast content. And then conversational is considered separate from interview. So I would say my style is probably somewhere between interview and conversational, which are the top 2 biggest, because I don't want it just to be where I'm only asking a set number of questions. I want it to really be where I'm exploring and learning at the same time as my audience. Now, this wasn't always the way I operated when I first started my podcast. I said, I'm only interviewing people in PR. I'm going to keep it to 27 minutes or less because that's the current commute time. And I have 5 questions I'm going to ask. Well, it was really boring for me. And I don't think it didn't get what I needed out of my guests either, right? So in order to have a more compelling offering for my audience, I had to kind of scrap that and start over. And that's another thing. It's okay to do that. It's okay to think you're going to be one thing and then move slowly into another thing. And then what cadence do you want? I would recommend highly that you do every week at a minimum to really get traction. If you do once a month or twice a month, it really is not going to give you the results that you want if you're trying to establish a relationship with people. My podcast currently releases twice a week. I used to do it, when I first started, I wasn't taking it very seriously. That was the other reason it didn't grow very fast. And so I would do some episodes, then I take a little break. Then I do some episodes, and it's like, no, I need to be consistent. So then I started doing 1 a week. And then I realized I had so much content backed up. Rather than have somebody wait 6 months for their episode to be released, I started doing 3 episodes. And then December is the end of the year, and it's also my birthday month. So I was really crazy and released an episode every weekday in December. And that helped push me over the 100 episodes. And that is when I started really seeing traction and audience growth.
And at that point with 100 episodes, do you think that the algorithms began to kick in and start recommending your podcast and pushing that? Do you think that may have had something to do with it?
100%. That's also about the time that I was able to get the .com for Your Brand Amplified. I could not get it before. Somebody in Australia had it and it redirected to their branding business. I could only get the .co or the .us or the .whatever. And by then, I had shared enough episodes. My guests had shared enough of my episodes. I was also appearing on other people's episodes with the name Your Brand Amplified that I took over Google page 1 and Google page 2. And so the person gave up the domain. So absolutely, algorithm has a lot to do with it for SEO value. And then and for recommendations through Apple, Spotify, and all of the other platforms.
Got it. And we do have a question coming in from Gabby right now. How did you go about building out your guest network and finding other podcasts to be featured on? So that question is like, how do you network?
Yeah. There are a lot of people who try to sell you on the services and they will place you on podcasts. Some of them cost a lot of money and you don't need to do that. There are also some platforms that are not as good as other platforms in getting you the right quality of guests and the podcast to be a guest on, right? You kind of have to do some testing to find out what's going to be right for you, but I'll share some of my favorite resources that have completely changed the game for me in terms of the quality. So going back, podcast length, you need to consider how long do you want your podcast to be? Going back to what kind of podcast are you doing? If you're doing a solo, you probably want to keep it to that under 10 minutes or 10 to 20 minutes timeframe, unless you have a lot to say and you think you can keep people's interest for longer than that. My podcast episodes are typically in the 20 to 40 minute mark. A few of them go into the 40 to 60. Very rarely do they go over 60, unless I have a guest who just has an amazing, really compelling story and a lot to share. Usually I'll tell people that I'll have them back later in the year for another episode if they have that kind of information so that we can break it up. And there are a lot of podcasts that also will break their content into 2 or 3 episodes. There's one I follow called A Little Bit Culty. They often will do 2 episodes on a guest because of the story of how they left their cult and all of that survivorship and everything else they want to share with the audience. Then the genre, right? So the top 5 podcasting genres right now are comedy, news, society and culture, health and fitness, and business. So that's another thing to consider. Do you fall into one of the top 5? That can be good and bad depending on how quickly you want to grow your audience. Do you want to be the big fish in a small pond of a smaller, less popular genre? Or is this where your content lives and where you really need to be? And how do you differentiate yourself from all the other podcasts out there? Then we get into hosting platforms. So the cost for hosting platforms can be everywhere from free. The one I use is Buzzsprout. There's a freemium model. You can upload, I think, 2 hours of content a month. It'll only save your podcast and promote it out for 90 days. So it's not going to be evergreen. Or up to $24, I think you can upload 12 hours of content. Directory integration is another one. You want a platform where you can go in and you can just click links. It'll take you to Apple, to Spotify, to everybody out there that will host your platform or host your podcast. So directory integration is really important. You want to make sure that you're picking one that you can easily upload. You don't have to go individually into all these other systems and upload. Talking about AI, is the system that you're using, the hosting platform, whether it's Ausha or, there's a whole bunch of them. And I put a link to some of the best podcast hosting sites below. Do they have an AI tool? Buzzsprout is the kind of granddaddy platform. I love it. I still use it. One of the great things about it is that they have created Host AI. So now I don't have to go to Capture or PodSqueeze and pay an extra fee, upload my audio, wait for them to spit out my captions, my transcripts, and all the other information, download it, re-upload it into Buzzsprout. It's all in one. So all I have to do is upload to Buzzsprout and hit yes, I want to use the AI tool, and then come back 5-10 minutes later. It'll give me 5 recommendations for titles that I can choose or not, but they're all SEO qualified, right? So they're trying to find the best titles. Now, some of them get a little long because then I have to shorten them because YouTube only allows 100 characters for a title. And YouTube recommends about 70 characters for a vodcast title. So that gets into a little bit of the weeds, but you really want to look at one that's going to make AI really easy. It's going to come up with your show notes for you. It's going to also embed the transcript. So if somebody wants to read the episode, they can read along with the audio. Compliance. Okay. So the IAB Tech Lab Compliance Program is really important. You want to make sure that the platform you use is compliant, because this is how they verify downloads, impressions, and listeners. This is how I know that the numbers that I get from Buzzsprout are legitimate, that the numbers I see on Chartable are actually what they say they are. So these are guidelines. They're set standard of principles. I don't know all of the different semantics within them, but I just know that this is something really important. And I actually had somebody who used to work at Buzzsprout on my podcast recently, and I basically spent the whole time grilling him on everything I wanted to know about the ins and outs of just this part of podcasting that I didn't know.
This is something that you're going to cover in just a minute, then you can put a pin in this one. But Monica was asking, what are the most successful external promoting tactics for podcasts?
Yeah. Gosh, well, a few of them include, I do actually get into that a little bit, but I think you need to look at integrated marketing strategies. So not just asking guests to share and sharing on your social media, but what other tactics are you using? Are you putting something in your newsletter? Are you making a blog post about each episode? And I will say I'm not doing all of these things because time. They're all things on my future aspirational to-do list, some of them. But you want to make sure that you're having guests who are going to promote, that will put in their newsletters, that will share out multiple pieces of content. You want to make sure that you're putting in all your social channels, in your stories, your reels. You want to make sure you're putting it on your website. If you're not doing a separate blog post, at least there's links. And then you can do, then you want to look at, is there an episode you really want to boost? I also have guests who will say, I'll boost this episode if I can be on your podcast. And if they meet the qualifications, they seem like they're a good guest, and I know they're also good about promotional dollars, of course I'll do that. And then you can also pay podcast promoters who will promote onto different platforms. And there's also a ton of groups and resources, particularly on Facebook. It's you can just put in podcast, need a guest, or podcasting, and you'll find a ton of groups that you can join that will help give you free resources and connection with other podcasters who might want to have you as a guest, might want to be on your podcast, places you can promote. They'll have promotional days when you put in your podcast and everybody shares their podcasts. So there are a lot of tools like that are the no-cost tools. But then, of course, the boosting, putting money. A lot of podcasts also buy ad time on other podcasts. So that's another tactic that's highly used.
That was a lot. Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. So when it comes to recording equipment, it is not, there's such a low barrier to entry to podcasting. You need to figure out how you're going to record. Kajabi actually will record podcasts now. Podbean, Riverside FM, StreamYard, Spotify. Not only will they upload your podcast on the streaming platform, but you can also record it right on their platform and edit it right in their platform. And Zoom. And I've been using Zoom just because lazy, and I already have Zoom for everything else. But the important thing is that if you're going to use it, record your audio tracks separately. Make sure that's in your settings, that you're getting the best high quality audio. You also want to make sure that you do have equipment. I have a Blue Yeti mic, kind of what's pictured in this picture. You want to make sure you have a quiet space. You probably want to use external wired headphones, not wireless, because if they die on you, then that's no bueno. But if you don't have the headphones, at least have a microphone and a quiet space. And you can get one of these microphones. Their typical price is $100 to $350, but I have seen them on Amazon. And I think right now with Prime Days, they're on sale for less than $100. And this is, Blue Yeti has all the settings that you need, it has multiple settings so that it can direct the way that you want the sound to go. I see more questions. I'm not sure if I've answered them all or if I should keep up.
There's one from Claudia. Do you ask your guests in advance to boost? Or are there any written agreements done? Or do you ask people to come on and you just go for it?
I ask people to come on and go for it. I also use Podmatch very heavily, which is one of the it's not really a secret weapon. They've had 60,000 episodes matched through their system. That's my favorite way to find high quality guests. I don't say yes to everybody, but moving to that system from just asking people I know, having clients on, putting it in these Facebook groups. I have a wait list now, and my podcast is booked out until April or May of next year for interviews. I work full time, so I can't just podcast all day, every day. I have to be really choosy and not record too many episodes a week. So Yeah. And then part of the agreement usually is that they will do some promotion. If not paid boosting, at least they're going to promote it to their audiences. And that's great because their audience is different than your audience.
Anika, one of the things that I jokingly tell our students is that while they're in school, that they should be thinking about how to USC Trojan horse, like their dream company or that perfect, the person that they've always been wanting to network with.
Yeah.
And how amazing that you have this platform now, that if there's somebody that you've always wanted to talk with or engage in this great conversation with, it seems like this is a great way for you to reach out to them. And people who, sometimes might go, sorry, I'm just too busy. When you go to engage with them in this way, suddenly that answer probably changes.
Absolutely. This is earned media for them. It's another person who's telling them that they're a thought leader in their field, right? That third-party validation that people want no matter who they are. And what's interesting is that there are groups that will also put together masterminds or podcast weekends. I belong to one called Pantheon, and podcasters will pay to come in for the weekend and do 10 interviews with people. And I think the people who are being interviewed might also pay depending on who they are, but they're really high quality guests. And sometimes you get the offer to be paid as a podcaster to go interview these people, even though they're people that you would really want. I remember I did an interview with Peter Shankman, who, if you're in the PR world, he created Help a Reporter Out. He's created a lot of tools that people in PR use on a daily basis. And it was one of the wackiest interviews I ever did. But even with all the things that he's done and being flown all over the world to keynote speak, he still was really happy to be on the podcast. So people are going to give you a yes more than they're going to give you a no. So if you, to your point, have that dream person that you want to speak to, starting a podcast is a great way to get them.
Amazing. And one more question from Ace, and then we can jump back into your presentation. Ace said, when promoting your podcast, which platform gives you the highest conversion of responses to your content?
That is a really good question. I can say it's not my Your Brand Amplified Instagram account that I don't do a lot with except for post reels with promotions, and it doesn't have the most followers. We reshare on my personal Instagram, which is at maybe 34,000 followers. Share it on my LinkedIn. Other people share it. I see a lot of times people will like the content and they'll share it out. Yeah, you know what? I need to do some investigating on that. I think a lot of it just comes down to promoting it in the different groups that I'm in as widely as possible. If I had a bigger budget and could spend more money promoting it everywhere and putting a lot more ad dollars behind it, I think it would be even bigger. But I'm just not there yet. And I'm not ready to do that.
Well, it seems like you're almost at a point where you could start to go and engage with some potential sponsors or partners. Now of this wonderful following that you have, and is focused in that business and PR area.
Yes and no. I've done a little bit of ad stuff, but it doesn't pay as well as you would think it would when you're a small, still, yes, I'm ranked, whatever, but in the scheme of things, I don't have millions of people listening to it. Or hundreds of thousands of people listening every week or every episode. So you really have to get to those bigger numbers to get the big dollars. But there are a lot of groups that will also preach that you just need the right sponsor. You need one person even before you've started your podcast. So I don't talk about that a lot in here, but I'm happy to talk offline with anybody who wants more information about ways to do that or how to find that ideal fit. Because really at that point, it's about market fit, not about your numbers.
Yeah.
If you have the right subject matter.
One of the things that we talk about is a minimum viable product.
Yeah.
Not being worried about having the product that's the end all be all, but I think that extends to finding your minimum viable audience as well. And of course, it feels great to have those big vanity numbers, right, with huge amounts of people who are following you. And of course, that's important. I'm not saying it's not. But especially when people are in the early stages and they're growing something, I think it's really important to have, right, whoever's with you, make sure that they're engaging and you're feeding them what it is that they love and that it's engaged. Would you agree with that?
100%. For instance, if you are in vintage fashion, right, or resell, or you want to be conscious and sustainable, and that's the kind of people that you're going to be interviewing for your podcast, there's so many brands coming up right now that want to show themselves, to showcase themselves in that space. I think that there would be great opportunity to get sponsors, and they might not be able to underwrite all of your expenses, but they might be able to underwrite a couple of episodes to start, right? And then you can add in a lot of things. And that's part of when we look at the ad tech landscape for podcasting. You can go into these ecosystems and like Podcorn, which I have a list of them and a couple slides, and you can see what are the opportunities and what are they looking for. And then you can put your bids out on what you'll do. So sometimes they just want an interview with the founder to go on your podcast. Sometimes they want an interview and they want some ad roll, or they want you to try out the product and then talk about it. Sometimes they want to give you the ad. Sometimes they want you to do a contest. There's a lot of different options. And so again, it just depends on how much time you have to weed through all of those options and or how much time you want to spend doing that. So production, I can go through this pretty quickly. You want to have theme music. There are a lot of great, all you have to do is Google theme music for podcasts. There are a lot of royalty-free places. I always recommend buying your theme music though. That way you always have it. You want to record an intro and an outro for your podcast. These can change. Who's editing? Are you doing the editing yourself? Are you paying somebody to edit? You can find really great editors all over. This is a global ecosystem now. I have an amazing editor in the Philippines, and I pay him what is a very fair wage for him and his wife and 3 kids to live on, but I could never get a podcast and vodcast, like both of them edited for what I can pay him in the United States. So you want to look at editors and you want to make sure that they're vetted. This person came to me through another podcaster who used to be an MTV Viacom executive. So I knew he was vetted and he's done a great job. And I'm able to help him provide for his family, which is fantastic. So it's a win-win for both of us. Editing software, these are the top ones: Pro Tools, Adobe, Riverside. So you can record in Riverside, and then you can also edit, Descript, and then GarageBand. So when we talk about finding your audience, I think we've talked a little bit about this, but your podcast, you need to look at it as a business. It is a brand, it's a product and or service that you're providing. So you want to look at this from Branding 101. Think about your mission of the podcast. What's your vision? What are the values that you want to bring to the audience? What's your positioning? And who's your ideal customer? Who's listening? How do you want to segment and target towards them? And then finding your ideal guests, a few ways that you can find guests to be on your podcast. And you can also find podcasts to be on. Again, Facebook groups. Matchmaker is one that has a freemium model and a paid model. Pantheon, it's a group of podcasters. They take you through a curriculum to start your podcast. They try to help you find sponsors right out of the gate. Podcastguests.com. Podmatch is probably my favorite. And then Women in Podcasting is another group. And they have a Facebook group, and then they have another group as well. And most of these groups eventually will ask if you want to join, if you want to pay something. Podmatch is a paid subscription, but it's a highly effective one. And it, again, is the one that's been a game changer for me. So then promoting your podcast, pro tip, record 12 episodes before you release one, because then you have tons of content ready to go. You have weeks and weeks of content that you can plan out. And if something happens in the meantime and you are not able to record for a week or two, then you'll already have those 12 episodes done. And so I love the Peso model. So I put it here. When you're promoting your podcast, you really want to look at the landscape of paid, right? How are you going to boost it? Are you going to do lead gen? Are you going to have sponsored content on somebody else's platform? Earned media, are you getting interviews because you're doing podcasts now? Or if you're doing other people's podcasts, it helps you promote your podcast. Shared, so what are your social media channels? How are you sharing it out? And then your own channels. So the only thing that we know will be everlasting, your email list, your website, the things that you own. So think about how you can use all of these in concert to promote your podcast. And I know we're getting shorter on time, so I just have a few monetization slides and then we'll go straight to questions. So hosting sites like Buzzsprout typically offer a few opportunities right in their ecosystems. So it can be ads, affiliates, sponsors, and subscriptions. So they make recommendations right there where you can add links to support your show. You can have a Patreon, Podfan, Buy Me a Coffee. You can ask people to PayPal you or even Cash App. Those are all monetization strategies that people are using for their podcasts. You can also have affiliate links. So I think on mine, I have an affiliate link for Buzzsprout and possibly one for Podmatch, because those are ways that if people join, then I can possibly receive money off of what I'm paying for these platforms. Ad tech, right? So typical ads are pre-roll, first segment, mid-roll, second segment, and post-roll. Those are the ways that ads can fit into a podcast. And here are a few of the top advertising platforms that you can look around in to see what they offer. And then additional monetization strategies. This is really where the bulk of people I know who are in podcasting make their money. They have a book. Maybe they're coming on podcasts and they have a podcast to talk about their book or their book series so they can sell more books. Crowdfunding. So people do crowdfunding through their podcasts. Charging guests for appearances. I have sometimes charged people. I've said, hey, you can wait until next April to be on my podcast, or if you want to expedite and I'll also put money towards more additional promotion, you can pay, and that it doesn't make me any money. It really just pays for my team to expedite the process of editing, getting it up, and then put some ad dollars towards it. You can go from podcasts to live events. I know Call Her Daddy, right, is one of the, I think it's the number 2 or number 3 largest podcast. She does a lot of live events where she gets to meet with her fans, and she's really been able to monetize that. You can have memberships. So I have podcasts that I listen to. There is one that I listen to that has a free podcast every week. She has a subscriber, podcast where it is like 2 episodes a month. And then she has a membership if you want to be part of her book club, and you get content in every month we do a different book, and then that's a different podcast. And so I bought a membership to that. A lot of people I know in the podcast world make money from business coaching and consulting for other people on how to start your podcast, how to monetize it, how to grow your audience, all of that. Production services, whether it's AI, building communities, guest matching, hosting, or doing masterminds. You can sell products and services. You can promote. Really, that's what mine is. It's a way for me to connect with people who might not do exactly what I do. So then they think of me and my company if they find somebody who's not exactly in their niche, or if they need somebody who has, find somebody who needs PR. Podcast is sales funnel. So I also know people who have podcasts and they only invite people on who are their ideal client. So then they can turn it into a sales call. So they'll come on, they're going to discuss your issue on the podcast. They're going to do some problem solving with you. Then when you get off the podcast, they're going to say, hey, that was fun. What did you think? Do you want to work together? A lot of people do that, and they make a lot of money doing it too. And then speaking opportunities. So parlaying your podcasting into speaking and being paid as a speaker. So just in summary, podcasting is a long game. You're really looking at 100 episodes. It takes consistency. Figure out how often you want to release episodes and be consistent. And the only overnight successes are the celebrities, the people who have really big backing and a lot of money, and they don't need to do this. They're not pouring their own money into it, right? So there you go. And these are some of my stats for my podcast and my next achievements that I'm looking forward to. I'll stop.
Thank you, Anika. First of all, what a fantastic presentation. I mean, truly, that was incredibly insightful. Thank you so much. We have a great question here from Danielle. Is there a specific podcast that comes to mind other than your own when you think of a highly successful promotional strategy? Is there one that pops up to you that you happen to know?
I think being in the business category, it's a little harder. I think ones that are really niche down, like a lot of ones that are in, there's one that's just about feng shui. And she also has a whole course you can do, and you can upload pictures of your house and your schematic, and she'll give you your feng shui report, right? So she's built a whole program out of that, but people listen to it because they also want to get that extra information. Also spiritual, whether it's like the Law of Attraction Tribe is a podcast. Stephanie Keith is the host. She has an app called Manifest It Now. It's actually an amazing app. She gave it to me for free because she was on my podcast, but I listen to the subliminals and the meditations every single day from her app. I talk about it, and she's one of the highest downloaded episodes I've had. What's interesting is even though I am in the business marketing category, a lot of the episodes that people really respond to are about spirituality in business or imposter syndrome, and how do you overcome imposter syndrome, and like other things that aren't necessarily like the tactical details of business. But then when it comes to my everyday clients, they'll listen to episodes and it reinforces concepts that we talk about with them. So I think those are just some examples. I think the more specific you can get with your content, probably the better. That's not something I've done because I love talking to a huge variety of people, but I think it's worked out okay so far.
That's one of the things we talk about in Capstone a lot is being careful not to boil the ocean. And one of the great rules of creativity that was always taught to me is that if you think about what you like and what moves your heart, moves your soul, and resonates with you, you'll find people who are in that same bucket. And so just focusing on that, the ones that you just mentioned, they were all so specific. And I bet that the people who are hosting those, they have a real magic and depth of knowledge that brings a lot of that out. A great question just came in from Lizzie. And this is a funny one. I bet there's a funny answer or funny answers to this. Any favorite podcast moments while recording? Anything that's especially inspirational or funny or that stood out?
Oh, gosh. Well, first I'm going to go back to the other question because I also thought about another one, a little bit culty, which I mentioned earlier. It's very niche. It's all about cults and cult survivors. They've created a huge platform for themselves out of being cult survivors of a cult called NXIVM and being on the vow. So they had a little bit of notoriety, not a ton, but they were able to parlay that into this huge platform. So that's one that I know is like, I would consider them one of the most successful ones I know. Funny moments. God, there was an episode I was trying to do with a woman who was in France and her electricity kept going out. So we were recording, but we were recording in the dark. That was pretty funny. I don't know. There aren't a ton of really funny stories. I think most people seem to be pretty prepared. I would say the ones where I have a guest who maybe hasn't practiced, who hasn't been on podcasts a lot, or only wants to talk about themselves are funny, not in a ha-ha way, but in a like, oh, here's another one. People who are like, I'm going to add so much value to your audience, but then all they do is talk about themselves and their story and prop themselves up. And then you go on Reddit and you Google them and then you see a Reddit feed about how they say that they're the best paramedic in all of New York, in the Bronx, and the blah, 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 and all these things. And you've already recorded the episode. So some people will choose after they have an episode like that to not release their episode. I still release those episodes because I feel like it's a pact I made with that person, right? It's an agreement that I made. But now I've started to get more choosy beforehand and not say yes to everybody who wants to come on just because they want to be on the podcast. If they're not quite the right fit, or I don't think they're quite ready.
You know, there's a question that Maritza just reminded me of, and it came in earlier in the evening. And it speaks very much to what you're saying right now and is a great one. Michael said, you said that some people quit podcasting because they run out of money. I thought it was fairly non-expensive to podcast. How do folks run out of money? The thing that's jumping out, and I want to throw this to you, is it relates to the point you were making just now, and it has to do with creativity, and it has to do with excuses. It has to do with when you run into a roadblock of some kind, there are 1,000 different things that are keeping us from going and creating the things that we know we want to create. To me, that's a little bit what that question sounds like, but it has to do with this. How do you run out of money when you're podcast? Or is that just another excuse? What do you think? Can you do it for very, very little?
Yeah, you can do it for very, very little. And you're right. It's an excuse. A lot of times it's with startups. It's with people's secondary brands. Like the first one, Women Acquiring Assets. The woman has a full-time job as executive director of myriad, which is the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. It's the largest Black real estate broker association in the country. She has a very, very busy job. She also has a nonprofit that she's trying to start with all these other things, right? And so it came to the point where I wasn't really getting paid to do the work. I was just paying editors to edit the episodes, but I was doing everything else. And I just couldn't do that in my business, all right? Like I wasn't trying to be a volunteer. So I wish I could have kept going for her, but I couldn't. And she didn't have the capacity to do it herself. So she still pays a fee to have the podcast up because we did 54 episodes and people still listen to them. But if she wants to do it again, but she can actually pay the right amount of money for me to promote it properly so that I get paid for my time, all of those things, then I would reconsider it. The other one, giving credit, is for an app called Kitty Credit, which teaches kids and families about credit from an early age. And there was just a lot of them trying to fundraise, trying to raise money, switching, their business model a little bit here and there, and then trying to figure out what the podcast was going to be. And when they said, we can really only do 1 or 2 episodes a month, I said, that's not going to get you the traction. That's really going to be a waste of your money and my time. because it's not going to get you the audience growth that you want to. It's not going to get in front of the parents or the businesses that you want to partner with, the credit unions, et cetera. So I think, that really goes back to also knowing who you are, what you want to do, what your goals and objectives are from the beginning. And it's okay to change it, but if you're going to change it, make sure that you can back it up. And so that was the case where I really just had to say, hey, this isn't going to work right now. I can't host this for you until we really know what this is going to be and that we can do an episode a week and we can make it really consistent.
Anika, one of the final questions I love to ask folks who come on is one simple one right from the heart. To you, right, when you wake up every morning, you think about how you're going to start your day and how you're going to approach things. What's a piece of wisdom that you would share with these students of ours who we love and care for so much that we invest in? What's top of mind for you that drives you and that you think is your key to success?
Well, I end every episode of my podcast by asking people for their motto or a verse or a poem or words that speak to them. And mine is always, be kind whenever possible. It is always possible. So I think about how can I go through my day giving people grace, but also giving grace to myself, being kind. And that doesn't mean being a pushover, right? It doesn't mean saying yes to everything. You can still say no with a smile on your face. You can still be kind about it. But I think if people bring more kindness into the world, then it would be a much more beautiful place. And today I actually did post a quote on my Instagram that really resonated with me because I just came back from a trip and it was a great trip, but not everything went the way I thought it was going to go. And I didn't get as much done. So I was feeling really stressed out this morning. So I said, never be in a hurry, do everything quietly and in a calm spirit. Do not lose your inner peace for anything whatsoever, even if your whole world seems upset. So I think and that was St. Francis de Sales. I think always just remember, take things with a grain of salt, take a step back from that emotion and that feeling of angst and reset, right? Take a deep breath, listen to a meditation or a mantra or a subliminal or a poem or hug your dog or your kid or go out and look at the sun or whatever. And just remember that the world still lives, this world still exists. There's always going to be the yin and the yang. There's going to be good things and bad things happening all the time, but you can only control your reaction to them. And so make sure that it's a good one.
To learn more about the Master of Science in Digital Media Management program, visit us on the web at dmm.usc.edu.